She was carrying a tray of champagne when she heard the lie that was about to cost a dangerous man everything he owned. Nadia Ease didn't stop walking, didn't flinch, didn't spill a single drop. That was the thing about being a waitress at the Alderon, Atlanta's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, tucked 40 floors above Buckhead like a secret the city kept for its wealthiest residents. You learned very quickly how to make your face say absolutely nothing while your mind was screaming. She set the champagne down at table 4, smiled, disappeared. Then she went back to table 9 and listened harder. Now, before we go any further, if you've ever watched someone get lied to right in front of your face and felt that slow burn of do I say something or do I mind my business? This story is going to hit different. Stay with me. Because what Nadia did next changed her entire life, and she didn't even see it coming. Drop a comment right now. Would you have said something? Keep that answer in mind, because by the end of this video, you might surprise yourself. Table 9 was tucked in the far corner of the Alderon's private dining room, a room within a room, separated from the main floor by frosted glass panels and a level of privacy that cost extra and came without questions. 3 men, 1 conversation, and a contract sitting in the middle of the table like a loaded weapon dressed in paperwork. Nadia had been assigned to that room specifically because she was good at being invisible. 6 months she'd worked at the Alderon. 6 months of carrying plates that cost more than her rent, smiling at men who never once looked her in the eye, and going home to a studio apartment in southwest Atlanta where the only thing waiting for her was a hospital bill from Emory University Hospital with her mother's name at the top and a number at the bottom that made her chest tight every time she looked at it. She was invisible by necessity. She needed this job. But some things, some lies, are so loud that even invisible women can't ignore them. The man at the head of table 9 was Sebastian Holt, Australian, mid-50s, the kind of wealthy that had stopped being impressed by wealth a long time ago. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never once in his life been told no and actually believed it. Beside him sat a younger man, Tristan Vale, sharp suit, sharper smile, the kind of face that made you want to trust it right up until the moment you realized you shouldn't. And across from them both, completely still, completely composed, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace but from absolute control, sat Seo Junho. Nadia noticed him the moment he walked in. It would have been impossible not to. He was somewhere in his early 40s, Korean, dressed simply in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything in her apartment combined. He moved through the room the way certain men move, like the room was already his before he entered it. His right hand, a broad-shouldered man named Kwon, positioned himself near the door without being told, and didn't move again. Nadia took their drink orders. Junho ordered in Korean. Tristan translated it to her without looking up from his phone. She wrote it down, walked away. And that would have been the end of it. Just another invisible moment in an invisible shift, except that as she turned, Konrad Brauer, the German contract lawyer seated to Junho's left, muttered something under his breath in German that stopped her mid-step. Diese Zahlen stimmen nicht. These numbers don't add up. Nadia kept walking, but her mind didn't. Here is something nobody at table 9 knew about the quiet Nigerian-American woman refilling their water glasses. Nadia Adai's Ease was not always a waitress. 3 years ago, she was one of the most sought-after certified translators in the Southeast, fluent in 7 languages: English, German, French, Italian, Mandarin, Arabic, and Indonesian, building a career interpreting high-stakes international contracts for corporations, law firms, and embassies. She had an office, a reputation, a future. And then Callum happened, her business partner, the man she trusted completely, the man who spent 18 months embezzling from their firm, falsifying translations to benefit corrupt clients, and when it all collapsed, made sure her name was the one attached to every fraudulent document. She lost her license, her clients, her savings, and when her mother Dorothy got sick, she lost the luxury of grief too. So she put on a white apron, learned to be invisible, and tried very hard every single day to forget that she could hear 7 languages the way most people hear music, not just the words but everything underneath them. The hesitation, the deception, the truth hiding inside what wasn't being said. She was at the sideboard pretending to organise napkins when Tristan Vale committed his first real crime of the evening. Conrad Brouwer had leaned forward and raised a specific concern, in careful professional German, about a clause in the contract, Clause 7. Asset reversion upon third-party default. He said, clearly and precisely, that it created unacceptable legal exposure for the primary investor and that he could not, in good conscience, recommend signing until it was amended. Tristan Vale smiled pleasantly and told Seo Jun-ho in Korean, Nadia caught every word, that the German lawyer found the structure impressive and was satisfied with the timeline. The room didn't change. Nobody gasped. Sebastian Holt nodded. Junho listened with that unreadable stillness of his and made a small sound of acknowledgement, and Nadia stood at the sideboard with a stack of napkins in her hands and felt something ignite in her chest that she hadn't felt in 3 years. She recognized this. She had lived this. From the other side. The question was what char? What was she going to do about it? She put the napkins down. Not dramatically. Not with any kind of announcement. She just set them on the sideboard quietly, the way you set something down when you've decided you're done pretending it matters, and she turned back toward table 9. Her colleague Jasmine caught her arm on the way past. Table 6 needs their appetizers checked. Manager's been watching the floor all night, Nadia. Don't give him a reason. Cover for me, Nadia said, quietly. Not a request exactly. Jasmine looked at her face and let go of her arm. Nadia circled back toward the private dining room slowly, the way she always moved, unhurried, purposeful, invisible. She topped up Conrad Brouwer's water glass, adjusted the position of a bread plate nobody had touched, and listened. Conrad was speaking again, still in German, still measured and professional, but there was an edge underneath it now. The controlled frustration of a man who keeps raising the same concern and keeps receiving answers that make no sense relative to what he said. He pointed at a specific page in the contract, tapped it twice with one finger. His voice was firm. He was talking about the profit split, 50-50. That was what had been agreed in principle. That was what every preliminary document reflected. But the contract sitting on that table, the one Sebastian Holt was steering Junho towards signing before the appetizers arrived, read 60-40, in Holt's favor. Buried in subsection language that assumed nobody on the other side of the table would read German well enough to notice, or care enough to say so. Conrad noticed. Conrad cared. Conrad was saying so, loudly, by his standards. Tristan Vale told Junho that the German lawyer was complimenting the wine selection and asking if it was Australian. Nadia set down the water pitcher. She thought about her mother, Dorothy Ease, lying in a hospital bed at Emory with an IV in her arm and a smile she put on every time Nadia walked in so that Nadia wouldn't see how much pain she was in. Dorothy, who had worked 2 jobs for 15 years to send her daughter to university. Dorothy, who had clapped at Nadia's certification ceremony like she was watching the Super Bowl. Dorothy, who had never once, not even after everything with Callum, not even after the career collapsed and the savings disappeared, and they went from planning a future to surviving a present, never once told Nadia to make herself smaller to fit the life she'd been handed. She thought about Callum, the way he'd smiled at her across a conference table the morning everything fell apart. Easy, unbothered. The smile of a man who had already decided that her name would take the fall and had made his peace with it. She thought about sitting in a courtroom and understanding, with the precise, agonizing clarity of someone who speaks 7 languages, every single word being said about her, and being unable to stop any of it. She had been Conrad Brouwer once, raising concerns in a language nobody was translating honestly, watching the room nod and move forward while she screamed into a silence only she could hear. She was done being silent. She straightened her uniform, took one breath. and walked into the private dining room with the particular calm of a woman who has already counted the cost and decided to pay it. She didn't go to Sebastian Holt. She didn't go to Tristan Vale. She went directly to Seo Junho. She approached his side of the table and leaned forward slightly, respectful, composed, her voice pitched low enough that it didn't carry beyond the four of them. Mr. Seo, I apologize for the interruption. I'm aware this isn't my place. Every eye at the table turned to her. Sebastian Holt's expression moved from surprise to irritation in about half a second. Tristan Vale went very still in the particular way that people go still when they've been caught doing something and are rapidly calculating their next move. Junho looked at her. Just looked at her. His face gave away nothing, not annoyance, not curiosity, not anything she could read. But he didn't dismiss her. He didn't raise a hand or look away. He simply waited with the patience of a man who has learned that the most interesting things in any room usually come from the direction nobody was watching. Your translator has not accurately conveyed a single concern Mr. Brower has raised in the last 20 minutes, Nadia said. The German lawyer has objected to 2 specific clauses in this contract. Clause 7, asset reversion upon third-party default, which he says creates unacceptable legal exposure for the primary investor, and the profit split, which he has confirmed reads 60-40 in Mr. Holt's favour despite a 50-50 agreement in principle. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Sebastian Holt leaned back in his chair. She's a waitress. Clause 7, Nadia said again, still looking at Junho. Still calm. Mr. Brower's exact words were that he cannot, in good conscience, recommend signing until it is amended. Your translator told you he was satisfied with the timeline. Conrad Brower had gone completely still. He was watching Nadia with an expression she recognized, the stunned relief of someone who has been shouting in an empty room and suddenly discovered the room wasn't empty at all. He spoke, German, direct and clear. She is correct. Every word she has said is accurate. Nadia translated it before anyone asked her to. He says I'm correct. Every word. Junho had not moved, had not looked away from her face. His eyes were dark and completely unreadable, and she was close enough now to notice that he was not, in fact, as unreadable as he appeared. There was something moving behind that stillness, something she couldn't name yet. He turned his head slowly toward Tristan Vale. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Tristan opened his mouth, looked at Junho's face, closed it. Get out, Sebastian Holt said, but he wasn't looking at Nadia when he said it. He was looking at Tristan, and his voice had lost every drop of easy confidence it walked in with. Kwon opened the door. Tristan Vale picked up his jacket and left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft final click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. And in the silence that followed, Seo Junho finally looked away from Nadia. He looked down at the contract on the table. Then he looked at Sebastian Holt with an expression so quiet and so devastating that Sebastian actually shifted in his seat. Nadia took a step back from the table. Her job here was done. More than done, probably. She was almost certainly about to be fired, and she had made her peace with that somewhere between picking up the water pitcher and walking through that door. Some things cost what they cost. But as she turned to leave, Junho spoke for the first time since she'd approached the table. Korean, low and unhurried, not directed at anyone in the room exactly. More like something said to himself. Kwon, near the door, heard it. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Nadia didn't understand it, but she felt it, the weight of it, the texture of it, the way you feel a piece of music in your chest before your brain processes the notes. She walked out of the private dining room, back into the main floor of the Alderon, with its soft lighting and its expensive silence and its indifferent glamour. The manager was waiting for her on the other side of the frosted glass. His name was Gerald Pittman, and in 6 months of working at the Alderon, Nadia had never once seen him sweat. Gerald was the kind of man who prided himself on composure the way other men prided themselves on wealth. It was his identity, his armor, his entire professional personality. He was sweating now. My office, he said, very quietly. Now. She followed him through the main dining floor, past the candlelit tables and the soft jazz and the oblivious wealthy people cutting into their $40 appetizers, and into the small manager's office behind the host's stand. He closed the door, turned to face her. Do you have any idea? He said, and then stopped, pressed his fingers to his temple, started again. Do you have any idea who is sitting at table 9 right now? A man being defrauded, Nadia said. Gerald stared at her. That is not. You cannot. Nadia. He lowered his voice even further, which she hadn't thought was possible. That is Seo Junho. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Do you understand what that name means in this city? She understood more than he knew, but she kept her face neutral and let him talk. I have worked 22 years in Atlanta hospitality, Gerald said. 22 years. And I have never, not once, had a staff member walk into a private dining engagement and insert themselves into a conversation between guests. He straightened his jacket. His hands weren't entirely steady. You're a brilliant waitress, Nadia. I want you to know I mean that sincerely. But I cannot. I have no choice. I know, she said. He blinked. I know. She held his gaze. You have to let me go. I understand. He looked at her for a long moment, and underneath the professionalism and the panic, she saw something that might have been guilt. I'm sorry, he said. And she believed him. She nodded once, went to collect her things. Maya intercepted her at the staff lockers, wide-eyed and electric with the kind of energy that only witnesses to extraordinary events carry. Nadia, what happened in there? Tristan Vale just walked out looking like he'd seen a ghost, and Sebastian Holt hasn't moved in 10 minutes and everyone is talking about, I'm going home, Maya. But what did you... Take care of yourself. She hugged her quickly, genuinely, the way you hug someone when you don't know when you'll see them again. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. The Atlanta night received her like it always did. Warm, loud, indifferent. Peachtree Road hummed with Friday night energy. Music from somewhere down the block, headlights sweeping past. The city doing what the city always did, completely unbothered by the fact that Nadia Ease had just walked out of the best-paying job she'd had in 3 years with nothing lined up and a hospital bill waiting at home like a bad roommate. She stood on the sidewalk outside the high-rise and did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in a very long time. She felt it. All of it. The fear and the exhaustion and the grief, and underneath all of that, stubborn and inconvenient and completely irrational, something that felt almost like relief. She had told the truth. Whatever came next, she had told the truth. She started walking toward the MARTA station. She didn't notice the man following her until she turned onto the second block. She only caught him because of the reflection in a darkened shop window, a tall figure keeping pace about 20 feet behind her, not rushing but not slowing either. She turned left at the corner instead of right, took the long route. He followed. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her stride even, kept her face forward, thought fast. Then a second figure stepped out of a building entrance ahead of her, and her stomach dropped completely. She stopped walking. The two men closed the distance, unhurried, almost casual, which was somehow more frightening than urgency would have been. The one in front was broad, heavy-jawed, wearing the particular expression of a man doing a job he has done many times before. He reached into his jacket. Everything happened very fast after that. Two other men came from nowhere. That was the only way Nadia could describe it later. Nowhere. One moment the street held 4 people and the next it held 6. And the two new arrivals moved with a quiet, terrifying efficiency that turned the situation completely inside out in under 30 seconds. No weapons drawn, no shouting, just movement, precise and absolute. And then the 2 men who had been following her were gone, redirected, removed, like variables in an equation that had been solved. Nadia stood on the sidewalk, breathing harder than she wanted to admit. On the ground where the first man had been standing, a single white business card. Face down. She picked it up slowly, turned it over. Just a number. No name. The cardstock was heavy and expensive and told her everything she needed to know about who it belonged to. She looked up and down the empty street, then her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at the screen for 3 full seconds before she answered. Miss Ease. The voice was calm. Korean-accented English, measured and unhurried, like a man who had decided exactly what he wanted to say before he picked up the phone. Are you hurt? She exhaled slowly through her nose. No. Good. A pause. The kind of pause that has weight to it. Those men work for Nathan Cole, Junho said. Sebastian Holt's vice president, the architect of tonight's arrangement. He identified you as someone who needed to be discouraged from speaking further about what she heard. Another pause. He will not have that opportunity again. Nadia looked at the card in her hand. You had people watching me. I had people nearby, he said. The distinction was subtle but deliberate. Is there a difference? Yes, he said simply. There is. She pressed her lips together. The Atlanta night hummed around her. Somewhere above the rooftops, the Buckhead skyline glittered cold and beautiful and completely unaware of everything that happened at street level. Why? She asked. A silence, longer than the others. Because, Junho said, honest people are difficult to find, and remarkably easy to lose. She didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure one existed. There is a Korean restaurant in Doraville, he said. Hanwoo. You will not find it on any map. Be there tomorrow evening at 7. A pause. Please. That last word, please, landed differently than everything before it. Like it cost him something to say it. Like it wasn't a word he used often, and he knew it, and she should know it too. She looked at the card one more time. I'll think about it, she said. She hung up before he could respond. Stood alone on the Buckhead sidewalk with her heart doing things she didn't have language for yet. Then she went to see her mother. Dorothy was awake when she arrived at Emory, propped up against pillows, watching a Nollywood film on her tablet with the volume barely above a whisper. She looked up when Nadia walked in and read her daughter's face the way she had been reading it for 28 years. Completely, accurately, and without needing a single word of explanation. She patted the edge of the bed. Nadia sat down and told her everything. Dorothy listened without interrupting, a skill she had perfected raising a daughter who needed to be heard more than she needed to be advised. When Nadia finished, the room was quiet, except for the soft hum of medical equipment and the muted Nollywood dialogue from the tablet. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then, who sent the men to protect you? Nadia looked at her hands. The man from the restaurant. The dangerous one? A pause. Yes. Dorothy nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she had already suspected. And are you going to meet him tomorrow? Nadia looked at the business card still in her hand, turned it over, turned it back. I don't know yet. Dorothy looked at her daughter for a long time, then she picked up her tablet, turned the volume up just slightly, and said, very calmly, very deliberately, yes, you do. Hanwoo didn't exist on Google Maps. Nadia had checked 3 times. She'd searched the address Kwon sent to her phone that morning, a text from the same unknown number, no greeting, just a Doraville street address and a time. And found nothing. No listing, no reviews, no photographs. Just a residential-looking block in the heart of Atlanta's Korean community where the street smelled of sesame oil and grilled meat and something sweetly floral she couldn't immediately identify. She almost turned back twice on the drive over. The first time was on I-85 when the rational part of her brain, the part that had survived betrayal and financial ruin and a fraud investigation with her name attached to it, reminded her clearly, and without drama, that she was a woman with $7 in her checking account, a sick mother, no job, and absolutely no business walking into a meeting with a man whose name made restaurant managers sweat. The second time was when she parked and sat in her car for 4 minutes, staring at the unmarked door of a building that looked like it could be anything. A private home, a community space, a very quiet place where problems got solved in ways that didn't make the evening news. Then she thought about Dorothy's voice. Yes, you do. She got out of the car. The door opened before she knocked. Of course it did. Kwon stood aside without expression and gestured her in with the practiced economy of a man who communicated exclusively in necessary movements. She followed him through a narrow corridor that smelled of barley tea and cedarwood and opened without warning into a room that stopped her completely. It was beautiful. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not opulent the way the Alderaan was opulent, all glass and performance and look at what money can do. This was something quieter. Low lighting from paper lanterns, dark timber walls, a single long table dressed simply with 2 cups of tea already poured, and a small ceramic dish of banchan she didn't recognize. Traditional Korean ink paintings on the walls, the kind that took years to learn and decades to master. The kind of room that said, "Whoever uses this space values things that cannot be bought, quickly." Seo Junho was already seated. He stood when she entered. That surprised her more than the room did. She hadn't expected that. A man like him, in a room like this, standing for a waitress from southwest Atlanta. He gestured to the seat across from him and waited until she sat before he did. Kwon positioned himself near the far wall and became furniture again. Junho looked at her across the table. In the warm lantern light, he looked different from the private dining room. Still controlled, still precise, still carrying that quality of absolute stillness that seemed to be simply how he existed in the world. But something was slightly different. The professional armor was present, but not fully engaged, like a man who had decided deliberately to let someone see slightly more than he usually allowed. He spoke in Korean. Kwon translated from the wall, quiet and neutral as a microphone. "You came. You asked," she said. Something moved briefly in his expression. Not quite a smile. The memory of one, maybe. "I ask many people many things. They do not always come." "I'm not many people," she said. This time the almost smile got closer to the real thing before he reeled it back. He lifted his tea, drank slowly, set it down with the deliberateness of a man who did nothing carelessly. "Tell me about yourself," he said. She looked at him evenly. "You already know. You told me to find out everything about her past. Carefully." She watched his expression. "Sound familiar?" A pause. Kwon's eyebrows moved approximately 1 millimeter. The closest thing to visible surprise she suspected either of them ever showed. Junho regarded her for a moment. "You understood what I said last night. In Korean." "Some of it," she said. "Enough. You speak Korean?" "Conversationally. It's not one of my 7. She wrapped both hands around her teacup. "But I've been in enough rooms with enough languages to pick up the edges of most of them." She met his gaze. "You should probably know that going forward. If there is a going forward." He absorbed this without visible reaction. Then, Nadia Adair's Ise, certified translator, 7 languages. Former partner at Ise and Rendell Language Services, Atlanta. License suspended 3 years ago following a fraud investigation that the evidence now suggests was largely engineered by your business partner Callum Rendell, who has since been linked to 2 other similar schemes in different cities. A pause. "You took a waitressing job to support your mother, Dorothy, Emory University Hospital, room 14B. The room was very quiet. "You've been surviving," he said, not unkindly. "When you should have been working." She kept her face still. It cost her something. "Is there a point coming?" "Yes." He set down his tea, looked at her directly. "I want you to work for me, as my personal translator. Every negotiation, every contract, every room where language is the difference between trust and betrayal." He paused. "After last night, I think you understand better than most what that difference costs." There it was. Clean and direct, no performance around it. She looked at him for a long moment. The lantern light moved softly between them. Somewhere outside, the muffled sounds of Doraville continued. A life that didn't know or care what was being decided in this quiet room. "I know what you are, Mr. Seo," she said. Quietly, carefully, not an accusation. Just the truth, laid on the table between them like the 3rd cup of tea nobody had poured yet. He didn't flinch, didn't deflect. "Yes, your business is complicated," he said, Some of it legal, some of it less so. All of it mine. He held her gaze. What I am offering you is legitimate, documented, properly compensated. You would translate, nothing more. And if I hear things I don't like? You heard things last night you didn't like, he said. You told the truth anyway. The almost smile again, closer this time, warmer. I'm counting on that, not afraid of it. She looked down at her tea. The ceramic was warm against her palms. She thought about the hospital bill, about Dorothy, about 3 years of making herself small and invisible and silent in rooms where she understood every word being said and said none of them. She thought about the way he'd stood when she walked in. The work would need to be completely separate, she said slowly. Whatever else your organization does. I don't see it. I don't know it. I don't translate it. I work negotiations and contracts only. Agreed. I set my own rate. Agreed. And if I ever hear something at one of your tables that I believe is wrong, she looked up, I will say so, directly, to you, the same way I did last night. Something changed in his face when she said that, subtle and deep, the way changes are when they matter, like a man hearing something he had genuinely stopped expecting to hear. Agreed, he said, and his voice on that third agreement was quieter than the first two, like the word meant something different by the time he got to it. The room settled into silence, not an uncomfortable one. The kind of silence that happens when two people have said something real and are giving it the space it deserves. Then Kwon spoke from the wall. The first time he had volunteered words unprompted all evening. The tea is getting cold. Junho looked at him. Kwon looked at the ceiling. And Nadia, for the first time in longer than she could remember, laughed, genuine and unguarded, startled out of her by the absolute absurdity of the moment. A sound so natural and so unexpected in that room that it seemed to rearrange the air. Junho watched her laugh, and something in his expression, quiet and unguarded and completely unplanned, was the most honest thing she had seen on his face all evening. He looked away first, reached for his tea. We should discuss compensation, he said. His voice was very slightly different. She noticed. She suspected he knew she noticed. Neither of them mentioned it, but the temperature in the room had changed, warm and complicated, and full of things that didn't have names yet. And outside, in the Doraville evening, Atlanta carried on, loud and layered and gloriously unbothered, while inside Han Wool, over cold tea and careful words, something quietly and irrevocably began. 3 weeks later, Nadia Ease sat in a glass-walled boardroom on the 32nd floor of a midtown Atlanta high-rise and translated a $40 million commercial real estate negotiation with the same quiet precision she had once used to carry champagne glasses across a rooftop restaurant. Different room, different table, same hands, same voice, completely different woman. The deal was between Junho's holding company and a consortium of Atlanta developers, legitimate, documented, structured cleanly under the careful watch of a contract lawyer Junho had flown in from Seoul, specifically because, as Kwon had relayed to Nadia without expression, Mr. Seo no longer trusts translators he did not personally select. She had translated every word faithfully, every objection heard, every clause examined, every party understood. When it was done, the lead developer, a broad Georgian man named Calhoun, who had clearly come into the room expecting to run the table, leaned back in his chair and said with genuine respect, Miss Ease, I have been in negotiations for 30 years, and I have never once felt this clearly understood by the other side of a table. Nadia smiled, said thank you, gathered her notes. Across the room, Junho was shaking Calhoun's hand, but she felt his attention the way you feel a change in weather, not seeing it exactly, just aware of it, present, against her skin. She had been feeling it for 3 weeks. That was the thing nobody warned you about when you agreed to work in close proximity to a man like Seo Junho. It wasn't the danger. She had anticipated the danger, catalogued it, made her peace with the calculated risk of it. It wasn't even the complexity of his world pressing occasionally against the edges of her clearly defined role. She had held that boundary without difficulty. It was the small things, the things that had no business mattering as much as they did. The way he always stood when she entered a room, every time, without exception. Like it was simply what one did. The way he had learned over 3 weeks exactly how she took her coffee. And never once commented on it, just ensured it was there, present, correct, waiting. The way he listened when she translated, not with the distracted half-attention of a man receiving information, but with his full self, his complete focus, like every word she spoke was the most important thing in the room. Because to him, apparently, it was. The way he had said her name that night on the phone, Nadia, careful and deliberate, like he had been holding it in his mouth and deciding whether to release it. She thought about that more than she was willing to admit even to herself. And she thought about what Kwon had let slip 3 days ago, accidentally or not. With Kwon it was impossible to be certain, that Junho had restructured his entire negotiation schedule around her availability. Not worked around it. Restructured, as in moved things, for her. She had not acknowledged this information. She had simply filed it somewhere quiet and gone back to work. But it was there. It was always there now. The boardroom emptied. Assistants gathering folders, developers filtering out in clusters of conversation, the specific energetic exhale of a room that had just completed something significant. Junho exchanged final words with Calhoun near the door. Kwon materialized at Nadia's elbow with her coat. She had stopped being startled by his sudden appearances, which she suspected was itself a kind of adaptation she should examine more carefully. "Mr. Seo would like a word," Kwon said, "if you have a moment." She had a moment. She told herself she was only staying because it was professional courtesy. She was not entirely convinced by this argument. The room cleared until it was just the two of them. And Kwon, who had taken up his customary position near the door with the practiced invisibility of a man who had perfected the art of being both present and absent simultaneously. Nadia privately thought that Kwon would have been an extraordinary waitress. Junho stood at the floor-to-ceiling window. Atlanta spread beneath them, the city enormous and glittering in the late afternoon light, the downtown skyline giving way to Midtown's trees, old Fourth Ward's rooftops, the distant green sprawl of the suburbs, a city of layers, of contradictions, of people living entirely different lives within the same square miles. He didn't turn around immediately, just looked at the city. "You did well today," he said. "I did my job," she said. "Yes." A pause. "You always do." He turned from the window, looked at her across the empty boardroom. That is not as common as it should be. She held her portfolio against her chest, kept her expression professional, kept everything she had been carrying for 3 weeks exactly where she had put it. Filed. Quiet. Managed. "Was there something specific you needed, Mr. Seo?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, withdrew a small envelope, cream-coloured, sealed, her name written across the front in that precise, deliberate handwriting she recognised immediately. The same handwriting from the back of the business card 3 weeks ago. He crossed the room and held it out. She looked at it, looked at him. "What is this?" "Something I should have said differently the first time," he said, and didn't have the words for in English. Her heart did something she refused to acknowledge. "You could have had Kwon translate." "No," he said simply. "I couldn't." She took the envelope. Their fingers didn't touch. The envelope was thin, 1 page inside, maybe less. The gap of air between their hands as she took it felt like something physical, like weather. She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the particular quality of his attention, that complete, unguarded focus he gave her when he thought she wasn't looking. Except she was always looking. She had been looking for 3 weeks and pretending otherwise with diminishing success. Nadia. The way he said her name, every single time, like it mattered which syllable carried the weight. She took a small step back. One step. Necessary. "I'll read it," she said. "Later." Something in his expression, just briefly, just a flash, was so unguarded it almost undid her entirely. Not hurt exactly. More like a man who had extended something real and was holding very still to see what happened to it. He nodded once, stepped back to give her space. She walked to the boardroom door, stopped with her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around and couldn't quite trust her face in that direction. "Thank you," she said. "For today. The deal was fair. Both sides walked out with what they came for." A pause. "That matters." "It matters more than you know," he said quietly. "That you make it so." She left. The elevator ride down was 32 floors of her standing very still, the envelope in both hands, not opening it, the lobby, the revolving door, the warm Atlanta air. She walked half a block and stopped under a magnolia tree whose roots had cracked the sidewalk clean open and kept growing anyway. Very Atlanta, she thought, very Atlanta. And she opened the envelope. One card inside. Cream, thick, his handwriting. 4 words this time. Korean. She read them slowly. Her lips moved. The translation assembled itself in her mind with the same automatic ease as breathing. 7 languages living in her like a second skeleton, always there, always holding her up. 4 words. Her eyes closed. The magnolia tree moved above her in the late afternoon breeze. Somewhere nearby, a street musician was playing something low and sweet on a saxophone, the kind of melody that had no agenda, just sound moving through warm air looking for somewhere to land. Her phone rang. She knew before she looked. She knew the way you know things that have stopped being surprises and started being inevitable. She answered. Silence first, just the soft, ambient presence of him on the other end. She had learned the texture of his silences over 3 weeks. This one was different from all the others. Quieter, more exposed. "You read it," he said. Not a question. He always knew. She looked up at the Atlanta skyline, the city enormous and layered and indifferent and beautiful, doing what it always did, holding every contradiction within itself without apology. Junho. His name in her mouth for the first time. She heard the precise moment he registered it, the almost imperceptible change in his breathing on the other end of the line. First time. He knew it was the first time. "You can't write things like this," she said softly. "Not to me." A silence, long and full and trembling with everything neither of them had said across 3 weeks of professional distance and deliberate restraint and coffee that was always exactly right. "I know," he said, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. The armor entirely gone now. Just a man on the other end of a phone who had written 4 words in his language because English didn't hold what he needed to say. "Then why did you?" she whispered. The saxophone somewhere on the street below hit a note so pure it almost hurt. "Because," he said, "I have been in every kind of dangerous room there is. Rooms with weapons, rooms with lawyers, rooms where the wrong word ends everything." A pause so long she counted her own heartbeats in it. "And I have never once been as afraid as I am right now." The magnolia tree moved. The saxophone breathed. Atlanta held them both without knowing it. Nadia pressed her lips together, looked at the 4 words in her hand, felt the exact shape of the decision in front of her. What it would cost, what it would change, what it would require her to step into with no guarantee of anything except that it was real. Whatever this was, it was real. She folded the card, slowly, put it in her pocket, against her heartbeat. "I'm going to see my mother," she said finally, a pause. "I know." And then, she stopped, and then sit there between them, open, unfinished. An unanswered question with a door in it. She hung up, stood under the magnolia tree on the cracked Atlanta sidewalk, one hand pressed flat against the pocket where the card was, 4 Korean words warming through the fabric against her palm. She started walking. And if there was something in her step, something lighter, Something that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago when she walked out of the Alderaan with nothing and everything at the same time. Well, Atlanta was full of stories, always had been. This one was just beginning. And if you made it this far, you already know this story isn't done. Nadia has 4 Korean words in her pocket. If you want part 2, where their worlds fully collide, Dorothy finds out, and someone from Nadia's past comes back to complicate everything, smash that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think those 4 Korean words said. The best answer gets pinned. Subscribe if you haven't already. New story every week. And I'll see you in part 2. The end.